Well, the Narendra Modi government has tabled its first budget in this term by the first full-time female Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. Let's decode it. I'm coming to you from the CII headquarters in New Delhi. I'm being joined by Shardul, Shroff, TV Narendran, as well as Rakesh Bharti Mittal. Mr. Narendran, since you're CII Vice President, I'll begin with you. What is your initial thought? I know a lot of details still have to come in with the kind of decisive mandate that was given for Narendra Modi. Has this budget lived up to the expectations?
I think number of things. One is the fiscal deficit, the finance minister said is at 3.3%, that's good. A lot of initiatives to continue this journey from shifting to a formal economy rather than informal economy. She talked of the ease of living, which I think is a good way to look at the government and citizenry interface. Simplification of taxes, reduction of exemptions. So there are a number of things in the budget, 100,000, 1 lakh crores for the infrastructure. So these are all positives. I think the other allocations are not so clear. She said it's in the annexures. We need to read that. But in some sense...
But also the fiscal deficit target has been brought down. There was a fear that would we breach it.
That's right.
But you know, it's turned out to be the opposite.
Yeah. So the math needs to be looked at with the details of the budget. I think from what she said, it's quite an achievement that they've managed to keep it to that level. So I think a number of steps in the direction that they announced. We look forward to seeing the detail. Also, I think a lot of actions to attract more foreign investments, capital from overseas to come into India, into infrastructure and other segments, to promote manufacturing in India, particularly for electronics. I think number of steps.
But you know, I think one of the other big takeaways has to be the amount of time that the finance minister spent on the biggest pain point of the economy, which has to be NBFCs as well as the banking landscape. Mr. Shardul Shroff, if I could come to you now, you know, a whole host of measures that have been announced for NBFCs, housing finance companies, for example, the return of the regulations to the Reserve Bank of India, plus you know, that one-time 1 lakh crore rupee announcement coming in with respect to NBFCs. What did you make of all of that, particularly the oversight powers that also will be increased for RBI?
I think the conflict of interest issue which was there in relation to NHB has been clearly resolved by pushing the regulatory oversight back to the Reserve Bank of India. The recognition that there is distress in the NBFC segment which requires funding is also a clear evident factor in their accepting the fact that there is funding required for the NBFC segment. So it's a realistic assessment in my view.
But you know, all the measures that have also been announced to deepen the corporate bond market for the housing finance companies, plus for the NBFC, that one-time 1 lakh crore rupee. You know, you understand the law, you understand the workings of them. I know a lot of them may be your clients, but will this help? Is this enough?
It will definitely help in the sense that it gives monies which is really additionality from a source which is a banking source or the Reserve Bank itself in terms of how the funds are going to come through. So the reliance on mutual funds, reliance on broader funding which is causing great distress down the line in some sense will be reduced.
Rakesh Bharti Mittal, besides the fact that I think maybe all four of you may have to pay 3% more tax, since you're all part of that super rich category, you know, like TV Narendran was pointing out, we still don't know how fiscal deficit is going to come down from 3.3 to 3.2. But having said that, as far as agriculture goes, you understand agriculture, the return of going back to basics. What did you make of that?
Well, I would say, you know, some of the things which the finance minister talked about, especially in the rural sector. I mean, just not the agriculture. When she talked about Gaon, you know, Gram and also looking at 100 new FPOs, clusters being formed. I think these are positive things which I see from that perspective. One of the major things which she talked about was strengthening the infrastructure, rural infrastructure, which is extremely important for agriculture. And I think that is somewhere I believe more resources and funding would be required. And while I have been talking about private sector participation in farming and food processing, I think even in the rural agriculture infra sector, we should look at private sector coming in either through PPP or various other models. Having said that, her focus on increasing domestic and international investments, I think that is something which is extremely important. And she did talk about the FDI and further relaxation in aviation, insurance and media, and insurance intermediary is going up to 100%. I think that is something which is a positive movement. On the MSMEs, where she talked about allocating 350 crores for interest subvention.
Yeah.
You did talk. We just
2%.
talked about the NBFC thing. I think that'll
help, yeah.
That'll further release liquidity. And on the social side, the new education policy, that is something which we
Plus
are
the
waiting
stock
for. Of course, and that is what we are waiting for. And I believe there will be structural, radical reforms
Okay.
in the new education policy.
We've also been joined by the CFO of HCL Technologies, Prateek Agarwal is here with us. Prateek, from your sector's perspective, we did hear the Finance Minister, for example, talk about new technology, animation, for example, was talked about, streamlining the entire process using technology, even when it comes to making life easier for the taxpayer. From the IT sector's perspective, hit, miss?
I think it's a miss. We have not utilized the opportunity to do some major things which we were waiting for. Things like reducing the overall tax of 48.3%, including the DDT. That has not been touched. We were also waiting for the SEZ sunset to be extended. Hopefully it is there somewhere in the fine print or to come later, but that's a date of March 2020 which needs to be extended. So from that perspective, from IT industry overall, I think those are misses.
Okay.
As an industry, we always help the entire industry and government and people at large to become more productive, and all those digital initiatives are, of course, our bread and butter, which we will continue to provide the population.
Mr. Shroff, if I could come to you, we just heard Prateek Agarwal touch upon, for example, DDT. He was optimistic about an extension for SEZ. However, the government seems to be in the mode of not extending sunset clauses. Having said that, if you could put it in perspective for us, because there were some very rushed statements in the end as far as DDT went, as far as STT also, for example, went.
I think instead of looking at that, one needs to see the issues of where the government has really incentivized new foreign investment. The fact that they're coming out with specific policies which will bring large scale investments into India is far more exciting than the other elements which are going to be really minor play in contrast to what the new monies which will come into place. So,
but having said that, for example, if you increase FDI in aviation,
yes,
look what's happening with Jet at NCLT. You want to sell Air India as well. Increasing FDI right now in aviation, I don't know.
No, the fact will be that it will create a stable aviation sector, because two of your companies have gone down. You clearly don't have the money in the Indian banking system to pay up. The IPO market is not going to fetch monies into the airways segment. So you do need monies to be brought in, and for that you have to create incentives for aviation companies to come. Okay. So it's perfectly logical.
Also could be for manufacture of aircraft.
Yeah, so Made in India program is always there. But it's a tough proposition. It's not something which is going to happen overnight. People are unlikely to move their aviation manufacturing facilities into India, but there would be collaborations like companies like HAL, which has also announced that there is going to be a collaboration in making of advanced helicopters. So those kind of things will happen. That's where the incentivization of foreigners coming and making joint ventures in India, an extension of their opportunity or this thing. In insurance, it will be a big thing, because if the intermediaries are now allowed to go to 100%, that's a long-standing demand of insurance companies outside of India. Plus the fact that this might be an indicator that instead of 49% as a cap, one may be able to go up to 75 or 51. Something obviously is going to stir in the insurance market, which is good because it will again bring in new investments.
So TV Narendran, picking up from what he said, look at the bigger sides of the story, which is, these kind of announcements. Has enough been done to spur investments? Because, we've been talking about the economy being in a slowdown. Yes, you've seen some measures for banking landscape. 70,000 crore rupees, is that enough for the kind of NPAs that we have at the moment? Some announcements on NBFCs, all of that. But has enough been done to spur investments?
So to me, to drive investments, firstly you need to see the growth in the economy and demand growth, which I think through the spend on infrastructure, hopefully that should trigger a lot of activity, plus the connectivity of the rural economy, I think should help. Next is to look at the profitability of private sector so that they can invest. Here again, some of the initiatives on reducing the cost of doing business will help. The third is to create the conditions whereby capital can come from overseas, because I think there's a lot of capital overseas which is looking for places to invest in, and I think creating conditions where FDI is easier, increasing the share, that's a good action. Fourth is to make
media. I mean that's a political hot
Yes.
potato, right? I mean I'm happy as a journalist maybe because there'll be more capital in my sector. My promoters may think differently, and most promoters may think differently. But having said that, it's a political hot potato as well.
And also, I think releasing capital by looking at public sector, looking at how can we reduce the stakes in that, unlock more capital from there, will make the
Where the minimum public shareholding norm,
Absolutely,
25% to 35%. Rakesh Bharti Mittal, could that be one of the biggest revenue drivers of revenue mobilization? Frankly, that was the only one that stuck to me as one. We don't know what the gain will, for example, be from the excise duty and the custom duty reject,
Yeah, I
particularly
think those
on oil.
details we still need to
Yeah.
see, but just taking forward from what Shardul mentioned and you on the question on aviation, I believe the MRO facilities can come up. There's a huge potential for that to come in India. And the minister also did talk about leasing and financing of aircrafts from the Indian financial system. On the resources, one point which he made was India's sovereign external debt is much lower than 5%, and they want to raise money in foreign exchange. So I think that is one area of generating of resources which they are looking at. But if I pick up on ease of doing business, I think 3 or 4 points which he mentioned, and I think that is something which is extremely important. The last point which he mentioned was to settle, to have a dispute mechanism to settle legacy litigations pre-GST on VAT and service tax and so on and so forth. I think that is something which is extremely good, and industry must take use of that, make use of that. On the GST, they talked about e-invoice from January 2020, so e-way bill will not be required. There's more transparency. I think that is extremely good. For quarterly returns for revenue of 5 crore, more than 5 crore, I think that is again ease of doing business. On the labor laws, he did mention about the 4 labor codes. I think that is something which needs to be done at the utmost priority.
I think it's supposed to come up in this
I know.
parliament
So
session.
I think
Cabinet
these are
has
the
cleared
things
it
which,
as well.
yeah, I'm only saying these need to be cleared at the earliest, because that's important. And also giving further relief to 0.3% companies up to 400 crore.
I'm sure
revenue.
most of you disappointed.
No, but the only thing I would have, 2 things which I would have liked to see was a roadmap of going down to 18% at some point of time, which has not been presented. And secondly, the 4 sectors which are outside the purview of GST, when would those be brought into under the GST gambit?
Okay.
I think these are the things where
But
I
those will
think
also
there
be
is some.
decisions for which you need the GST Council.
I know, but I'm just saying a roadmap. Ultimately,
point.
GST
Fair
Council would have
point.
done that.
Mr. Agarwal, if I could now come back to you, he brought up the corporate tax rate cut. Yes, it's only for turnover of up to 400 crore rupees. You don't have a roadmap on that front as well. Do you think it's also a missed opportunity maybe in a lot of other sectors? Yes, you've had some mention of fintech. Look at healthcare. Healthcare was an obvious miss. We're talking about education, attracting foreign students to come here at a time when it's so difficult to already get admissions for citizens here. And as far as startups go, for example, HCL does like to incubate startups. At least that was some excitement in the budget speech.
Certainly, I mean, doing away with that angel tax is definitely a positive. I think that was a pain point for startups, and generally simplifying those procedures, I think, is certainly a positive. So yeah, there are hits and there are misses.
Okay. Shardul, if I could come back to you. I want to get some more of your views on what has been announced for the banking landscape, the NBFCs. She also mentioned that there will be stronger governance for public sector banks. We don't know what that means. When she also talks about this new classification for government holding for CPSCs, and then she caveats that by saying government holding. Could this be return of that big idea where the government holding in all banks, not bad debt, but government holding in all banks could be at a holding company level, and you mobilize that? Would I be right?
I see the argument about change in the holding more on the PSCs, not so much on the banks. But yes, there will be disinvestment in banks also. Simultaneously, there's been an augmentation about 70,000 crores. But when you compare the kind of losses which say an ILFS has made of 90,000 crores, this doesn't even cover one single enterprise, one account. So yes, it's the funds coming into the banking sector are problematic. And I think therefore when you talk about regulations in this thing, I see a clear enhancement of the audit function which in some sense has failed. The supervisory control over banks which should have brought these issues up 3 to 5 years ago, and the fact that the Reserve Bank's own audit reports or the reports in terms of regulation were weak. So perhaps she means that that part of the regulatory supervision of the RBI will be enhanced so as to detect these issues much faster than what has happened so far. Because the Reserve Bank reports have been clean. If you see the story which has built up in most of these organizations, the RBI has not discovered these questions till there has actually been a failure.
Another former governor, Urjit Patel, says the story is totally different. He can do that now that he's no longer the governor.
So the second theme, as was mentioned, is privatization of central public sector enterprises, where today some of the laws clearly say that the government's holding has to be 51. Clarification which is made today is that government along with other public companies, public sector enterprises will be counted as 51. So government can take back money, but the substitute might be a public sector enterprise, like for example what happened in ONGC and HPS, or PFC. So that's the kind of model that they seem to be indicating if they don't reduce the level from 51. But where there are non-strategic or not that important enterprises, the question of even going lower than 51 or even lower than 49 with a strategic investor would be open.
TV Narendran, I asked you if enough has been done to spur investments. Let me make it more specific now. Has enough been done or anything been done to get the private sector to invest? Because that is what has been a real sticky point. And has enough of the pump priming of the economy done? Because if you're not going to see an increase in government spending, and you folks don't keep investing and keep at where it is, the economy will slow down even further.
Sure. So I think private sector will again depend on the faith you have in the long-term future of India. I think a lot of the investments are happening because you believe in the long-term story of India. So if I look at the industry I represent, steel, all of us continue to invest because we believe that the demand for steel will grow and it's a great place to produce steel, right? So to me, it's more driven by the longer-term view rather than the immediate affordability or capability. And I think companies with stronger balance sheets have an advantage over companies with
Obviously,
weaker
that's always the
balance sheet,
case.
right?
Yeah.
So that's one part. As far as the government expenditure is concerned, I think the intent is there. But again, how do you finance that becomes an issue? Because if you want to spend 100,000 crore on infrastructure, where is that money
coming from?
So the PPPs become important. She did refer to that. But again, one needs to see the detail. How do you attract foreign capital into projects like this in India? If the opportunity is good, if the processes are simple, I'm sure we can attract it.
Maybe a global investor summit, India's answer to Davos in a friendlier weather. Mr. Mittal,
I think on the raising investment, if I see, she did talk about public-private partnership in rolling stock of railways, tracks, and the maintenance facilities. I think that's a good opportunity. The other thing which she talked about, the finance minister, on defense, and also on the startups. There were many grey areas which have been clarified today.
Yeah.
And I think that is something which is extremely important. I mean, giving clear that there will be no scrutiny and you don't have to justify fair market valuations which were being asked for time and again. So that is a good thing for startups, because I believe Indian ecosystem has the potential to be the largest startup ecosystem in the world. The other the quick thing which I picked up was the social enterprises and the voluntary organizations can get listed.
Yes.
It's an interesting aspect. I really don't know whether the CSR funds can be invested into these and they can get relief or not. That is something
And also we have
which we need to
like
see.
you have the Bharti Foundation.
So
for
I think this
example.
is something good where you can actually then go and look at raising money and to bring in impactful social projects and programs. And one other thing they talked about was on water, which was true in the rural areas and many other things. But I think one thing which I see amiss was there is a problem of water availability and accessibility even in the urban areas. So I think water as an issue is a country specific issue, and it's not only the government. I think every citizen will have to really work on to ensure that we see how we can reduce wastages, and have this critical resource.
1 out of 10, 10 being the highest. Rate the budget.
Well, I would compliment the finance minister.
1 out of 10.
I don't give the rankings.
Surendran,
I'll follow him. We need to see more detail.
are you both going to do the same as
No,
well?
I think it was a 7 out of 10.
7 out of 10?
I'll pass as well. I do have.
You already sell mostly misses, so is it even a 5?
No, I think the whole idea about divestment is a good one, and what she's done this time is, just taking an extreme situation. For example, there is a CPSE which is
Yeah.
50% owned by a bank, a PSU, which is in turn 50% owned by government, is effectively
Yeah.
25%
Yeah.
government owned. But they do have the control, and that is a smart way of doing it. I think this whole fiscal deficit of 3.3%.
We have to wait for the fine print.
3.1% is just the
Yeah.
interest burden of the government. If they can really divest, get out of areas where government doesn't need to be, there is no reason you have to pay that interest.
At the
There's no
first
reason
place.
for the fiscal deficit. And of course, reduction of interest rates. Guess
Correct.
who's the biggest borrower of them all? It helps them.
With that, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for decoding the budget with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.